The moment she stepped through the door, every hair along my spine stood up, and I did not know why. My name is Ravik Sorn, and I come from a line of hunters. My people, the Caithrin, do not need weapons to know who is dangerous. We feel it. It lives in our blood, passed down from ancestors who tracked prey across open plains long before we built ships that could cross the stars. When something dangerous enters a room, we know before our minds have time to think about it. That is what happened the day the human girl walked into the training hall on the Wanhale. She was small, thin, even, compared to the rest of us. Her hair was the color of dry wheat, and her eyes were a plain, quiet brown. She wore the same gray training uniform as every other cadet, and she carried nothing that marked her as special. She walked in without looking at anyone, found the last empty chair in the back row, and sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not speak. She did not smile. She did not glance around to see who was watching her, the way most new cadets do on their first day, hungry for a friendly face. And yet, across that hall, every single Predator lineage cadet went still. I felt it happen to me before I understood what was happening. My claws, which stay retracted unless I am afraid or about to fight, began to press against the inside of my fingers. Beside me, a Dravith cadet named Ozu, whose people hunt in packs across ice fields, stopped mid-sentence and turned his head slowly toward the back row, the way a wolf turns toward a sound in the dark. Across the aisle, a Senate elder in training, whose entire species reveres stillness as a virtue, let out a low breath that in her language means danger, close, unknown. None of us said a word. We did not need to. It was written in our bodies. Something in that back row had just been marked, by instinct forged over 10,000 generations, as the single most dangerous thing in that entire hall. And she had not moved a single muscle. I told myself it was a mistake. Our biology is not perfect. Sometimes strange smells or strange chemicals can confuse the ranking instinct that all Caithrin carry inside us. Perhaps the recycled air of the ship carried some residue from the medical bay. Perhaps it was a translation implant malfunction, sending false signals to whatever ancient part of my brain does the sorting between predator and prey, between danger and safety. But when I looked at Ozu again, and then at the Senate elder, I saw the same confusion in their eyes that I felt in my own chest. 3 different species, 3 completely different instincts, all screaming the same warning at the exact same time, about a girl who had done nothing except sit down quietly and fold her hands. The instructor walked in a moment later. His name was Corvin Athey, an older Caithrin with gray fur along his jaw, and a voice that could silence a room without effort. He looked out over all of us, 40-some cadets from a dozen different worlds, all sent here to the Wanhale for the Joint Fleet Training Program that every species in the Coalition took part in during their second year. He began to read the roll call, names in alphabetical order, by homeworld designation, and one by one, cadets answered. When he reached the human designation, there was only one name, Grace Ellery. The girl in the back row lifted her head very slightly, the smallest motion, and said, "Here." Her voice was soft and completely unremarkable. It did not carry threat in the way a growl might carry threat, or the way a raised voice from an angry cadet might make the room tense. It was simply a young woman's voice, calm and even, answering a question she had been asked 1,000 times before, and yet the sound of it landed in that hall like something heavier than words should ever be. I do not know how to explain what I felt in that moment, except to say this. My instincts, the ones bred into my species since before we had language, told me that I had just heard the voice of something that had survived encounters I could not imagine. Not because of anything in her tone, because of the absence of anything in her tone. No fear, no excitement, no need to be noticed. Just a flat, steady confirmation of her own existence in that room, the way a predator confirms it is still breathing after a long and dangerous hunt. Corvin Athey continued down the list without pausing, as if he had felt nothing at all. Perhaps humans did not register on whatever instinct guided him, since his species and hers had crossed paths only a handful of times before this training cycle began. But for the rest of us, the predator lineage cadets scattered throughout that hall, something had shifted. We had walked in, ready to measure each other, the way we always did, sorting rank and threat among ourselves the way our ancestors once sorted the herd from the pack. Instead, every one of us had quietly and involuntarily placed a small human girl from the back row at the very top of that list, without a single reason we could name. After the roll call ended, Corvin Athey explained the structure of the training program. We would spend the next several months working through simulations together, learning to operate as a unified crew regardless of species, since the Coalition fleet required exactly that kind of cooperation to keep its member worlds safe. There would be combat drills, navigation exercises, diplomatic simulations, and survival scenarios. Cooperation, he said, was the only thing that had ever kept any of our worlds standing against the dangers waiting beyond Coalition space. I barely heard half of what he said. My eyes kept drifting back to the girl in the back row, who sat through the entire briefing with her hands folded and her eyes fixed calmly on the instructor, never once looking at any of us, never once seeming to notice the tension she had created simply by existing in that room. When the session ended, cadets began filing out in loose groups, chatting the way young people do after a long briefing, comparing notes on which instructors seemed strict and which simulations sounded interesting. I found myself walking near Ozu, who leaned close and spoke in a low voice only Catherine hearing could easily catch. "Did you feel that?" he said. It was not really a question. I felt something, I admitted. I do not know what it means. "It means the ranking instinct fired," Ozu said. "It fired hard, harder than I have ever felt it fire. Even during my final trials back home, when I stood across from an actual pack leader, twice my size. For a girl who did nothing," I said. "Who has not moved from that chair since she sat down in it?" Ozu shook his head slowly, the gesture his people used to express something between confusion and unease. "That is exactly what worries me," he said. "She did nothing, and every one of us still knew." We reached the corridor outside the training hall, where cadets from a dozen worlds mingled in loose clusters before heading to their next assignments. I caught sight of Grace Ellery again, walking alone near the far wall, her pace unhurried, her expression unreadable. A pair of human cadets nearby called out a greeting to her, something friendly and casual, the kind of small warmth new cadets offer each other on a long and uncertain first day. She returned a small nod and a few quiet words, polite but brief, and then continued on her way toward the residential wing. There was nothing menacing in the exchange, nothing that should have troubled me at all, and yet I stood there in that corridor, watching a young woman walk quietly toward her quarters, and felt the same instinct rise in my chest that I imagine my ancestors once felt when they caught sight of something enormous moving through tall grass, something they could not yet see clearly enough to name, but already understood they should never underestimate. I told myself, as I made my way back toward my own quarters that evening, that I would learn more about her before drawing any conclusions. Perhaps there was a simple explanation. Perhaps she carried some scent from her homeworld that our instincts simply misread. Perhaps it was nothing more than an odd coincidence of biology, a glitch shared by several different species purely by chance. But some quiet part of me, the same part that had kept my ancestors alive across 1,000 dangerous hunts, refused to believe that explanation. That part of me understood, even on that very first day, that the girl in the back row was not going to be an ordinary cadet. And it understood something else as well, something I would not be able to put into words until much later. Every predator in that hall had looked at her, and every predator in that hall had been right. The first time someone tried to challenge her, it happened so fast that most of the hall did not even register what they were watching until it was already over. His name was Dresk Volo, a cadet from a species called the Marinoth, whose people build their entire society around rank and dominance. Among the Marinoth, position in any group is decided through display, through posture and voice, and the sheer confidence of presence. Dresk was broad-shouldered even for his own kind, with a deep voice that carried easily across any room, and he had spent his first week on the Wanhale testing every new cadet he met, the way his culture expected him to. Some cadets backed down immediately. A few pushed back and earned his respect. It was, in his world, simply how things were sorted. We were gathered in the common hall between training sessions, a wide room with long tables where cadets from every species ate and talked and studied together. Grace Ellery sat near the end of one table, alone, reading something on a small handheld device, her tray of food only half finished beside her. Dresk noticed her the way he noticed everyone new, and he walked over with the easy, rolling stride of someone who had never once doubted his own place in any room he entered. I was seated close enough to see everything clearly. I do not think Dresk meant any harm. It was simply instinct for him, the same way breathing was instinct, to measure the newcomers around him and place them somewhere in his mental order of things. He stopped across the table from her and set both hands down flat, leaning forward slightly, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted. Among his people, this posture said clearly, "I am larger, I am stronger, and I expect you to acknowledge that." It was not a violent gesture. It was closer to a formal introduction, the kind exchanged between his own people constantly, a simple test to see how someone responded under a small amount of pressure. "You are the human," he said, his deep voice pitched just loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "I have heard talk about you. Silent one, back row one. I would like to understand why everyone speaks about you so much when you have done absolutely nothing since you arrived." Grace looked up from her handheld device. She did not flinch. She did not lean back. She did not smile nervously, the way many cadets did when Dresk turned his attention on them for the first time. She simply looked at him, her brown eyes steady, and waited a moment before answering. "I have not done anything," she said, "because there has not been anything worth doing yet." It was such a plain, simple answer that for a moment Dresk did not seem to know how to respond. Among his own people, a response like that, delivered without heat, without posturing, without any attempt to match his display, could mean only one of two things. Either the other person did not understand the challenge at all and was too foolish to recognize it, or the other person understood it completely and considered it beneath any real response. I watched Dresk's confidence flicker, just slightly, like a light dimming for half a second before returning to full brightness. He leaned in further, his voice dropping into something closer to a low growl, a sound meant to test whether this small, quiet human would finally show some sign of retreat. "Perhaps you should learn," he said, "that on this ship, some cadets outrank others. It would serve you well to understand where you stand before you find yourself in a position you cannot manage." The room had gone quiet around us. Cadets from a dozen worlds had stopped eating, stopped talking, and turned to watch. I felt the same instinct rise in my chest that had gripped me on the very first day, the sense that something enormous was about to happen, even though nothing outward had changed at all. Grace had not moved from her seat. Her hands remained folded loosely near her tray. Her breathing, as far as I could tell from where I sat, had not changed even slightly. She looked at Dresk for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, "I know exactly where I stand." That was all. No raised voice, no display, no attempt to prove anything. Just 5 simple words, delivered with total calm, and somehow they landed with more weight than anything Dresk had said. Dresk straightened up slowly. For a creature whose entire culture depended on reading dominance in the smallest details of a rival's posture, something in her stillness must have told him more than words ever could. I watched his eyes flicker briefly toward her hands, her shoulders, the base of her throat, searching for the small signs of nervousness that would normally accompany a response like that from someone genuinely being challenged. He found nothing, no tension, no tightness, no sign at all that she considered this conversation to be a contest of any kind. After a long pause, Dresk gave a short nod, the kind his people used when acknowledging a peer rather than someone beneath them, and walked away without another word. He did not raise his voice again. He did not return to challenge her a second time that week, or any week after. Later, in the training yard, I asked Ozu what he thought had happened. He backed away, Ozu said, watching Grace from across the field, where she practiced a simple hand-to-hand drill with quiet, economical movements. Nothing flashy, nothing wasted. But I do not think he knows why. I do not think any of us know why. I had begun keeping a quiet log of my own observations by that point, more out of curiosity than anything official. During physical training sessions, instructors monitored our biometric responses through small devices worn on our wrists, tracking heart rate, breathing, and stress levels, mostly to make sure no cadet pushed themselves into danger during difficult drills. I noticed something strange whenever Grace took part in exercises that involved simulated pressure, timed challenges meant to raise a cadet's pulse and test how they performed under stress. Her numbers never spiked. Other cadets, myself included, showed clear jumps in heart rate during timed obstacle courses or simulated emergency drills, the natural response of any living creature facing sudden pressure. Grace's numbers stayed level, calm, almost resting, even during exercises specifically designed to push cadets toward their limits. When I mentioned this to one of the medical staff, a soft-spoken Senate named Yura, she only shrugged and said humans varied more than most species in how their bodies responded to stress, and that it was not considered unusual enough to flag for review. But it felt unusual to me. It felt like watching someone walk through fire without noticing the heat. There was a drill near the end of that second week that I still remember clearly. Corvin Athey set up a simulation meant to test how well cadets could hold their composure during a sudden, unexpected malfunction. A training exercise designed to mimic the chaos of an actual emergency without any real danger involved. Alarms blared without warning. Red lights swept across the training hall. A recorded voice announced a fabricated hull breach, counting down numbers meant to simulate a limited window before the section would be sealed off. Cadets scattered in different directions, some rushing toward the marked exits, some freezing in place, a few shouting instructions to each other in the confusion the simulation was designed to create. I felt my own pulse hammering, even though some part of my mind understood clearly that none of it was real. Grace did not run. She did not freeze. She walked, at an unhurried pace, directly toward the nearest marked exit, checking briefly over her shoulder to make sure the cadets nearest her were following the correct path, offering a calm, quiet word of direction to a smaller cadet from a species unfamiliar with the layout of the ship. She reached the exit exactly on time, without ever once appearing rushed, without ever once raising her voice. When the alarms shut off and the lights returned to normal, Corvin Athey gathered us for a brief review. He praised several cadets for quick thinking and gently corrected a few others who had frozen under the pressure of the simulated crisis. When he reached Grace, he paused for a long moment, studying her the way an experienced hunter studies unfamiliar tracks in the snow. "You did not seem troubled at all," he said, his tone carrying something between curiosity and caution. "It did not feel like the kind of thing that needed to trouble me," she answered simply. Corvin Athey did not press further, though I noticed something pass across his expression, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. It was the same look I had seen on Ozu's face during our very first day, and the same feeling I carried in my own chest every time I found myself near her. Something in her calm did not match anything we understood about how a young cadet, new to military training, new to the pressures of fleet service, should behave. That night, in the quiet of my own quarters, I found myself thinking again about the moment she had answered Dresk so calmly, and the moment she had walked steadily toward that exit while alarms screamed around her. I began to understand, slowly and uncomfortably, that whatever instinct had gripped every predator lineage cadet on that very first day had not been wrong, and had not been some strange trick of biology or ship air. It had been trying, in its own ancient and wordless way, to warn us of something true. Grace Ellery was not simply calm because she lacked the capacity for fear. She was calm because somewhere, long before she ever stepped onto the Wanhale, she had already learned exactly what real danger felt like, and had already decided, long before any of us met her, precisely how she intended to carry herself through it. I did not yet know where that calm had come from, but I understood, more clearly with each passing day, that I very much wanted to find out. It was Lucy Bennett who finally gave me an answer, though she did not mean to, and though she seemed to regret it almost the moment the words left her mouth. Lucy was another human cadet, friendly and easygoing, one of the few people who seemed genuinely close to Grace, though even their friendship looked quieter than most. I had noticed the two of them sometimes sitting together during meals, saying little, comfortable in silence the way old friends often are. I approached Lucy one evening in the small garden module the Wanhale kept for cadets who needed a quiet space to think, a room filled with plants grown under soft artificial light, meant to remind travelers of their homeworlds. I told her, honestly, that I was curious about Grace. I did not mention the instinct that gripped every Predator lineage cadet in her presence, since I doubted Lucy would understand what that even meant. I simply said that Grace seemed different from other new cadets, calmer than seemed natural, and I wondered if Lucy could help me understand why. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, turning a small leaf between her fingers, before she answered. "She does not really talk about it," Lucy said. "Not because it is some deep secret. I think it is more that she does not see the point in talking about something that is simply over now. But I know a little, from things she has mentioned once or twice, late at night, when she thought no one was really listening." I waited, careful not to press too quickly. "Before the academy," Lucy continued, "Grace spent almost 2 years doing border and reclamation work, out past the edge of settled space, in territory that had been abandoned during an earlier conflict. It is dangerous work. The kind most people are not suited for at all. Small teams, sometimes just 1 or 2 people, sent into old ruined settlements and damaged habitats to clear out dangerous wildlife that had moved in after the people left, and to recover anything valuable enough to be worth the risk." "Dangerous wildlife," I repeated slowly. "Not the kind you would expect," Lucy said. "Some of it came from experiments that went wrong during the war, things that were never meant to exist, bred for combat and then abandoned when the fighting ended. Some of it was simply large predators that moved into the ruins once the people were gone, adapting to hunt among the wreckage. Grace worked alone for most of it, days at a time, sometimes longer, in places with no support, no backup, nothing but her own judgment standing between her and whatever waited in the dark. I thought of the alarms blaring through the training hall and the calm, unhurried way Grace had walked toward the exit while cadets around her scattered in confusion. I thought of the way she had answered Dresk Volo without the smallest flicker of tension in her voice. Slowly, uncomfortably, pieces I had not understood before began to fit together. "She has been in real danger," I said. "Actual danger, not simulations." "More than once," Lucy said quietly. "More than I think she has ever told anyone fully. I do not think it made her hard, exactly. I do not think it made her cold. I think it just rearranged what counts as frightening to her. A training alarm is not frightening when you have spent nights alone in a collapsed building, listening to something large moving through the dark, trying to guess whether it has found you yet." I sat with that for a long moment, turning it over the way Lucy had turned the small leaf between her fingers. "Why does she not speak of it?" I asked. Among my people, someone who had faced such things and survived would carry that as an honor. It would be spoken of freely, remembered, celebrated. Lucy considered the question carefully before answering. "I think for her, it was never about being honored for it," she said. "She did not do that work to be admired. She did it because someone needed to, and she happened to be capable, and every time she went out there, she was thinking less about herself and more about whoever was waiting for her to come back safely. I think that is just how she is built. quiet, because the loud part of her, if she ever had one, got used up doing the work no one else wanted to do. I left that conversation with far more questions than answers, but with something else as well, something that had begun to reshape entirely how I understood the instinct that had gripped me and every other predator lineage cadet on that very first day. Among my people, and among the Maranoth and the Dravith, and every predator lineage species aboard that ship, our ranking instinct existed for one purpose only. It told us, in the space of a single glance, who among us could hurt us, and who could not. It was built by evolution across countless generations, refined by every ancestor who survived a hunt or avoided becoming one. It did not care about kindness, or intention, or reason. It cared only about capability, about the raw, simple truth of what a creature was capable of doing if circumstances demanded it. And every single one of those instincts, without exception, had looked at a quiet young woman with wheat-colored hair sitting silently in the back row, and had understood immediately that she was capable of things far beyond anything the rest of us in that hall had ever faced. It was not menace we had felt on that first day. It was recognition. Some ancient, wordless part of every predator aboard that ship had looked at Grace Ellery and understood, correctly, that she had already stood face to face with genuine danger, many times, and had survived it, and had learned from every single encounter exactly how to remain calm when everything around her fell apart. I found myself, in the days that followed, watching her differently, not with the wary tension I had carried since our first meeting, but with something closer to quiet respect, tinged still with a healthy amount of caution. I began to notice small details I had missed before. The careful, economical way she moved through crowded corridors, never wasting a step, never placing herself somewhere she could easily be boxed in. The way her eyes tracked the exits of any room she entered within the first few seconds, an old habit clearly worn deep into her behavior by necessity rather than choice. The way she always seemed to know, before anyone announced it, when a training simulation was about to begin, as though she could feel the subtle shift in the air before the alarms ever sounded. One afternoon, during a rare free period between training sessions, I found myself sitting near her in the common hall, working through a set of navigation calculations that Corvin Athey had assigned for review. She was reading quietly from her handheld device, as she often did, and for a while, neither of us spoke. Eventually, curiosity overcame my usual caution, and I asked her directly, though I tried to phrase it as gently as I could manage. "May I ask you something?" I said, "about the work you did before you came here?" She looked up from her device, studying me for a moment with those calm brown eyes, neither surprised nor guarded, simply attentive. "You can ask," she said. "I may not answer everything." "That is fair," I said. "I only wondered how you learned to remain so calm during the drills, during the alarms, even when Dresk Volo tried his challenge with you in the common hall. My people would call it strange, this calmness of yours. We are not used to seeing it in someone your age, someone new to this kind of life." Grace was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same careful attention she seemed to give everything. "I think calm is not something you are born with," she said finally. "I think it is something you build, slowly, the same way you build anything else. Every time something frightening happened to me, out in the places I used to work, I had a choice. I could let the fear take over and maybe survive anyway, or maybe not. Or I could set the fear aside for just long enough to think clearly, and use that clear thinking to actually get through whatever was happening. After enough times of choosing the second option, it stopped feeling like a choice at all. It just became how I responded." "That sounds difficult," I said honestly. "It was," she said. "Some nights it still is. Even now, even here, where nothing real is actually happening to me. But it also means that when an alarm goes off in a training hall, or when someone I have never met decides to test me across a table, none of that feels like the kind of thing worth losing my calm over. I have already spent that fear on things that mattered far more." I thought about my own people's traditions, the way we celebrated our hunters, the songs and stories told about ancestors who faced great danger and lived to tell of it, wearing that survival like a badge of honor for the rest of their lives. Grace carried something similar inside her, I realized, but she wore it completely differently, not as a badge to display, but as something private, folded away and rarely spoken of, brought out only when circumstances required it, and set aside again the moment they did not. "Do the others know?" I asked. "The rest of the cadets, what kind of danger you have already faced?" "A few," she said. "Lucy knows most of it. I do not go out of my way to hide it, but I also do not see much reason to make it a topic of conversation. It happened. It is over now. I am here to learn how to work as part of a crew, the same as everyone else." "But you are not the same as everyone else," I said, more bluntly than I intended. "Every Predator lineage cadet on this ship felt something the moment you walked into that training hall on the very first day. Something in us understood, before we had any reason to, that you were not an ordinary new cadet." For the first time since I had met her, something shifted very slightly in Grace's expression, not quite surprise, but something close to it, a small crack in the calm surface she carried so consistently. "I did not know that," she said quietly. "I thought I was simply being quiet." "You were," I said, "but apparently, for creatures like myself, quiet and dangerous can sometimes look exactly the same, when the person being quiet has already learned everything there is to know about real danger." She considered this for a long moment, turning her handheld device over slowly in her hands, and then she gave me the smallest hint of a smile, the first genuine expression of warmth I had seen cross her face since I had met her. "I suppose that makes sense," she said. "The scariest people I ever met, out in the places I used to work, were rarely the ones shouting the loudest. They were almost always the ones who had gone completely quiet, because they had already decided exactly what they needed to do next." I left that conversation with a strange and unfamiliar feeling settling in my chest, something between admiration and unease, though the unease, I noticed, had grown considerably smaller than it had been on our first day together. I understood now that the instinct which had gripped me, and Ozu, and every other Predator lineage cadet aboard the Wanhale, had never been wrong. Grace Ellery was, without question, one of the most capable and dangerous individuals any of us had ever encountered. But I understood something else as well, something that our ancient instincts, built for a much simpler world of predator and prey, had never been designed to recognize. Her danger was not something she carried toward us. It was something she had built, slowly and deliberately, entirely so that she would never again have to stand helpless in front of whatever waited for her in the dark. I did not yet know how soon I would see that carefully built calm put to its true test. But looking back now, I understand that some part of me, deep down, in that same ancient place where instinct lives before reason ever catches up to it, already knew that the quiet in Grace Ellery would not remain untested for very much longer. The lights failed first, and then the real alarms began, and every cadet in the lower training deck understood almost immediately that this was nothing like the drills we had practiced before. We had been working through a joint navigation exercise deep in the lower section of the Wanhale, a part of the ship rarely used except for maintenance access and storage, when the entire deck shuddered under an impact none of us could explain. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely, replaced a moment later by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. A recorded voice began speaking over the ship's system, but this time the words were different from anything we had heard in a training simulation. "Containment breach, lower storage bay. All cadets clear the area immediately." For a moment, nobody moved. We had grown used to false alarms designed to test us, and the first instinct among several cadets was to assume this was simply another drill, more elaborate than the last. Then, from somewhere down the darkened corridor behind us, came a sound none of us had heard before, a low, grinding shriek, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal tearing. Ozu was the first to break the silence. "That is not a recording," he said, his voice tight. That sound is real. Chaos followed almost immediately. A Dravith cadet near the back of our group bolted toward the nearest exit without waiting for instructions, colliding with a Senate cadet who had frozen entirely in place, eyes wide, body rigid, with the particular kind of stillness his species fell into under extreme stress. A stillness that, unlike Grace's calm, came from paralysis rather than control. Two Maranoth cadets began shouting orders at each other, each certain their own plan was correct, neither listening to the other. I felt my own claws extend fully without meaning to, my heart hammering against my ribs, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run toward the nearest exit and never look back. Later, we would learn what had actually happened. A containment unit in the lower storage bay, holding a specimen recovered from a recent survey mission, a large predatory organism collected for scientific study before proper safety protocols could be finalized, had failed during routine transport, releasing the creature into the maintenance corridors below the training deck. It was fast, powerful, and utterly unfamiliar with the layout of a starship, which made it more dangerous rather than less, since it lashed out at anything that moved without any pattern we could predict or avoid. In the middle of all that chaos, I looked for Grace. She was already moving. Unlike the rest of us, she had not frozen, and she had not bolted blindly toward the nearest exit. She moved with the same economical calm I had watched her carry through every training drill since the day she arrived, but sharper now, faster, every motion clearly serving a purpose. She grabbed the arm of the frozen Senate cadet, pulling him firmly but gently out of the path of the fleeing Dravith cadet before he could be trampled, and guided him toward the wall, out of the main flow of panicked movement. "Stay against the wall," she told him, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the chaos. "Do not run into open space. Move only when I tell you." She turned toward the two arguing Maranoth cadets next, her voice cutting through their shouting with a firmness I had never heard from her before. "Stop arguing and listen. The exit behind us is blocked by the crowd. There is a secondary maintenance corridor, 30 meters to the left, that connects to the upper lift. Take anyone who can move quickly and go now." They obeyed her, I think, less because of anything about her rank, since she held no authority over any of us, and more because something in her voice carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had given orders like this before and had been right every single time. I found myself moving toward her without entirely deciding to, some instinct pulling me closer to the one point of stability in a rapidly collapsing situation. "What can I do?" I asked, surprised at how steady my own voice sounded despite the pounding of my heart. She glanced at me, assessing quickly, the way I imagined she must have assessed countless dangerous situations before this one. "You are Catherine," she said. "Good hearing, good night vision. I need you to help me track where that thing is moving, so we do not walk into it by accident." I nodded, grateful to have a purpose amid the chaos, and followed her toward the source of the grinding, shrieking sounds rather than away from it, every instinct in my body protesting the decision even as I made it. We moved together down the dim, red-lit corridor, Grace leading with a calm, measured pace that somehow made me feel steadier simply by matching it. She kept close to the wall, checking corners before rounding them, her eyes constantly scanning for movement, for shadows, for anything that did not belong. I listened as carefully as I could, my ears straining for any sound beneath the alarms and the distant shouting of other cadets still finding their way toward safety. "There," I said, catching a scraping sound from somewhere ahead and to the left. "Something large, moving fast." Grace nodded once, absorbing the information without any visible reaction beyond a slight adjustment of her path, angling us away from the sound while still moving toward the area where the trapped cadets needed to pass. "There are still people back there," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. 3, maybe 4, who did not make it out with the first group. "We need to get to them before that thing does." We found them a moment later, a small cluster of cadets from several different species, cornered in a dead-end section of corridor where a maintenance door had jammed shut behind them, trapping them exactly in the path the creature seemed to be moving toward. Their fear was immediate and obvious. Several of them pressed hard against the jammed door, one small cadet crying out for help in a language I did not recognize. Grace did not hesitate. She moved directly toward the jammed door, examining it quickly with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything, running her hands along its edges until she found what she was looking for, a manual release mechanism hidden beneath a service panel. "Help me with this," she said to me, and together we forced the panel open and hauled on the release lever until the door finally groaned free, sliding open just enough for the trapped cadets to squeeze through, one at a time. That was when the creature found us. It came around the corner behind us with terrible speed, larger than I had imagined from the sounds alone, its movements strange and unfamiliar, clearly disoriented by the metal corridors of a ship so unlike whatever environment it had come from. Cadets screamed and scrambled through the narrow opening in the jammed door, pushing past each other in their hurry to escape. Grace stayed exactly where she was. She did not run, she did not freeze. She positioned herself squarely between the creature and the remaining cadets still working their way through the narrow gap, her stance low and steady, her eyes fixed on the creature with total, unwavering focus. I felt every instinct in my body screaming at me to flee, and yet some part of me, the same part that had recognized her from the very first day, understood clearly that running now would mean abandoning the one person in that corridor who actually knew what she was doing. "Keep them moving through the door," she said to me, her voice low and even, not a trace of panic in it, despite the enormous, disoriented creature now only a short distance away. "I will handle this." I did as she asked, guiding the last few frightened cadets through the narrow gap while Grace held her ground, watching the creature's every movement with the same careful patience she had shown throughout every training drill since her arrival. When it lunged, she did not meet it head-on. She moved sideways, precise and unhurried, using the narrow width of the corridor against the creature's own size, guiding its momentum past her rather than into her, the same principle I had seen her practice countless times in simple hand-to-hand drills that had seemed unremarkable at the time. The creature crashed into the wall beside her, disoriented further by the impact, and in the brief window that followed, Grace reached for a small device clipped to her belt, one of the standard emergency tools every cadet carried but rarely needed, and activated it against the creature's flank. It was not a weapon meant to cause harm. It was a containment pulse, designed specifically for situations exactly like this one, meant to disrupt the nervous system of large organisms just long enough to allow for safe capture rather than confrontation. The creature staggered, its movements slowing rapidly until it finally collapsed into a stunned and harmless stillness on the corridor floor. By the time the ship's containment team arrived, alerted by the earlier alarms and moving as quickly as they could through the chaos elsewhere on the deck, Grace was already helping the last of the trapped cadets to safety, checking each of them briefly for injury with the same calm efficiency she had carried through the entire encounter. I stood there in the aftermath, my own heart still pounding, staring at the stunned creature on the floor, and then at the quiet young woman who had just walked directly toward it, while every other cadet on that deck, myself included, had wanted nothing more than to run in the opposite direction. She looked over at me, and for the first time I saw something close to exhaustion cross her features, a brief flicker of the effort that calm had clearly cost her, gone again almost as quickly as it appeared. "Is everyone accounted for?" she asked quietly, and I realized, even in the aftermath of genuine danger, her first thought remained entirely focused on whether anyone else needed help. "Everyone is safe," I told her, "because of you." She shook her head slightly. "Because we worked together," she said. "I could not have gotten everyone through that door alone." I did not argue with her, though I understood clearly, standing there in that dim red corridor beside a stunned creature and a group of frightened but unharmed cadets, that the instinct which had gripped me on the very first day, the instinct that had gripped every Predator lineage cadet aboard the Wanhale the moment Grace Ellery walked quietly into that training hall, had been telling the truth from the very beginning. She had always been the most dangerous thing in any room she entered. We simply had not yet understood, until that moment, that her danger had never once been aimed at any of us. News of what happened in the lower storage bay spread through the Wanhale faster than any official report could contain it, and by the following morning, something in the way cadets moved around Grace Ellery had changed completely. It was not loud. There were no announcements, no ceremonies, nothing that resembled the way my own people might have celebrated such an event back home. It showed itself instead in small, quiet ways that only someone watching carefully would have noticed. Cadets who once crowded the long tables in the common hall without a second thought now left a small measure of space near wherever Grace chose to sit, not out of fear exactly, but out of something closer to instinctive deference, the same unconscious respect a pack gives to whichever member has proven, beyond question, that their calm can be trusted in the worst moments. Dresk Volo approached her again that week, though this time his posture carried none of the challenge from their first meeting. He stopped near her table, inclined his head in a gesture I recognized as a formal acknowledgement among his people, reserved only for those they considered true equals, and said simply, "I misjudged you. I will not make that mistake again." Grace accepted this with the same calm she carried through everything, offering only a small nod in return, no lecture, no reminder of their earlier exchange, as though the matter had already been settled and required no further discussion. The Senate cadet she had guided out of danger, whose name I later learned was Paris, began seeking her out during free periods, sitting near her quietly, sometimes simply working through his own studies in comfortable silence, the way a young creature might stay close to whoever had once kept it safe during a storm. Grace never seemed to mind this. She treated him the same way she treated everyone, with the same quiet patience, never making a display of what she had done for him, never using it to claim any kind of ownership over his gratitude. Even Corvin Athey, in the formal debrief that followed the incident, spoke of her carefully, choosing his words with obvious deliberation. He praised her quick action, her clear thinking, and her ability to guide frightened cadets to safety under conditions that had caused even experienced instructors difficulty. But he did not dwell on it, and I noticed, watching him closely, that something in his own demeanor toward her had shifted as well, the careful respect one predator shows toward another whose true capability has finally been confirmed beyond any doubt. For my own part, I found myself thinking often, in the days that followed, about the very first moment Grace had walked into that training hall and the instinct that had gripped me so completely before I understood any reason for it. I had spent weeks trying to explain that instinct as some kind of biological error, a strange misfire of ancient senses never designed to properly measure a species as unfamiliar to us as humans. I understood now how wrong that assumption had been. The instinct had not been broken. It had simply been ahead of my understanding, recognizing something true about her long before my conscious mind had gathered enough evidence to reach the same conclusion. My ancestors had built that instinct across countless generations to answer one single question: who among us, if circumstances demanded it, could truly protect this group, and who could not? Grace Ellery had answered that question in the lower storage bay more clearly than words ever could. I found her one evening, several days after the incident, sitting alone in the small garden module where I had first spoken with Lucy Bennett, the soft artificial light filtering gently through rows of quiet green plants. She was reading again, as she so often did, her handheld device resting lightly in her hands, her posture calm and unhurried in the way I had come to recognize as entirely her own. "May I sit?" I asked, and she nodded, setting her device aside without seeming to mind the interruption. For a while, neither of us spoke, and I found the silence between us comfortable rather than tense, a strange shift from the wary uncertainty that had defined so much of our early interactions. "I have been thinking," I said finally, "about that very first day, when you walked into the training hall, and every Predator lineage cadet aboard this ship felt something we could not explain. You mentioned that before," she said, a small note of curiosity in her voice. I still find it strange to imagine. I did nothing that day except sit down and listen to a briefing. That is exactly what made it strange to us as well, I admitted. Among my people, danger usually announces itself. Posture, voice, the particular way a creature holds its shoulders when it intends to fight. We are built to read those signals instantly, without conscious thought. You gave us none of them, and yet every one of us understood, immediately and completely, that you were the single most dangerous person in that entire hall. Grace considered this for a long moment, her eyes drifting toward the quiet rows of plants around us, their soft green light casting gentle shadows across her face. I do not think I ever wanted to be dangerous, she said finally. Not the way your people mean it, at least. When I was doing that work, out past the edge of settled space, I was never trying to prove anything, or to earn some kind of reputation. I was only ever trying to make sure that whoever was counting on me got to go home safely. Sometimes that meant standing very still when everything in me wanted to run. Sometimes it meant moving quickly when everyone else had frozen. It was never about strength for its own sake. It was always about whoever needed protecting. But you became something formidable in the process, I said, whether or not that was ever your intention. I suppose I did, she said quietly. I think when you spend long enough learning how to stay calm in front of real danger, that calm becomes part of you, whether you meant for it to or not. I did not build it to impress anyone, or to win any kind of contest. I built it because the alternative, panic, hesitation, made it far more likely that someone would not come home at all. I thought about my own people's traditions again, the songs and stories celebrating hunters who faced great danger, the pride we took in displaying our own capability openly, as a badge worn for others to see and respect. Grace's capability worked in the opposite direction entirely. She carried it quietly, almost invisibly, revealing it only in the moments when it was genuinely needed, and setting it aside completely the rest of the time, content to sit unnoticed in the back row of any room she entered. Does it trouble you, I asked carefully, that our instincts marked you as dangerous, rather than simply capable, or brave, or kind, which are equally true of you, I think, based on everything I have witnessed since we met? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly rather than rushing to answer it. I do not think it troubles me, she said finally. I think danger and safety are closer to each other than most people realize. The same calm that let me stand still in front of that creature in the storage bay is the same calm that let me help Paris find his way out of danger, and the same calm that let me answer Dresk without losing my composure. It is not really about being dangerous or being kind. It is about being steady, no matter what is happening around you, and letting that steadiness serve whoever needs it most in that particular moment. I found myself nodding slowly, understanding settling over me the way morning light settles gradually over a dark landscape, revealing details that had been present all along, simply waiting to be seen clearly. My people rank threats, I said, so that we know who to be wary of, who to avoid, who to challenge, and who to respect from a careful distance. It is how we have survived for countless generations, sorting the world quickly into safe and unsafe, without needing to think too deeply about the details. That sounds practical, Grace said, a small note of genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time since we had begun speaking. It is practical, I agreed, but I think it also has limits. Limits I only understood clearly after meeting you. Your people do not carry instinct the way mine do. You are not born already knowing how to measure danger. You learn it, deliberately, one difficult experience at a time, and then you choose, again and again, exactly what to do with everything you have learned. My people rank threats to know who to fear. You became the very thing worth fearing, entirely on your own, through nothing but choice and difficult experience, and then you chose, every single day since, to sit quietly in the back row anyway, never asking for anyone's fear or admiration at all. Grace was quiet for a long moment after that, looking at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something softer than her usual calm, touched faintly with surprise, as though she had never considered her own story in quite those terms before. "That is a kind way of putting it," she said finally. "I am not sure I always feel as steady as it must look from the outside. There are still nights I remember things I would rather not remember. But I suppose you are right that I have never wanted any of it to define how people see me. I would rather be the quiet person in the back row who helps when it matters than the loud person everyone watches out of fear." "I understand that now," I said, "though I do not think you will remain unnoticed for very much longer, not after what happened in the storage bay. Word travels quickly aboard a ship this size." She smiled slightly at that, a small, genuine expression that reached all the way to her calm brown eyes. "Then I suppose I will have to get used to being noticed a little more than I would like," she said, "though I imagine I will still find myself in the back row, out of habit, more often than not." We sat together after that, in comfortable silence for a while longer, the soft green light of the garden module settling gently around us, the distant hum of the Wanhale systems, the only sound beyond our own quiet breathing. In the weeks that followed, the training program continued much as it had before. Cadets from a dozen worlds working through drills and simulations, learning slowly how to function together as a single crew despite our countless differences. Grace remained exactly who she had always been, quiet, calm, careful never to draw attention to herself unless circumstances genuinely required it. But something had shifted permanently in how the rest of us understood her, and in how the predator lineage cadets among us, myself included, carried ourselves whenever she was near. We no longer felt the wary tension of that very first day, the instinct screaming warnings we could not yet explain. In its place had grown something steadier, something closer to trust, the particular kind of trust that only comes from watching someone prove, beyond any doubt, exactly what they are capable of, and exactly how they choose to use that capability when it matters most. I think often, even now, about that very first day, about the quiet young woman who walked into a room full of strangers and sat down without seeking anyone's attention at all, and about the ancient instinct in my own blood that recognized her instantly for exactly what she was, long before any of us understood why. My people rank threats because it is how we have always survived, sorting the world quickly into who to fear and who to trust, using instincts built across countless generations of careful, necessary caution. But Grace Ellery taught me something my instincts alone could never have shown me, something I carry with me still, in every room I enter and every stranger I meet aboard this vast and endlessly unfamiliar ship we all now call home. The truly dangerous ones are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who have already faced the worst that danger has to offer, who have learned exactly what it costs to remain calm inside it, and who choose, every single day afterward, to sit quietly in the back row anyway, asking for nothing, offering everything, whenever it is finally needed most.